Yo, what's up guys, Alf here, and today is the day I've been waiting for such a long time. We're finally getting a big B&R for Historic, and this is the biggest shakeup that we've had in years, honestly, and I'm so excited about this because I haven't really felt like Historic has been at its best since pre-Sorin, honestly, which is almost a year at this point. You know, we went straight from Sorin-dominated format straight into the Eldrazi-dominated format, and we've been stuck with that ever since, basically, and I'm really not a fan of... I think the Eldrazi format has been even worse than Sorin because I tend to like interactive gameplay, and I feel like the effect Eldrazi has had on the format has really pushed the format into super linear, two ships passing in the night, not much interaction, which I really dislike, and I feel like a lot of these changes could really help the format health going forward. So there's a lot to talk about here because there's so many changes. So what I'm going to do in this video is basically go through each of the changes, say what I think about them, what effect I think that's likely to have on the format as a whole, and also which specific decks are likely to be getting better and worse as a result of them. And I've also not read their explanations yet as well, so once I've gone through each of the changes, I'm also then going to go through and read their explanations for the first time, see what I agree with, see what I disagree with, and then I'll also talk about which decks and archetypes I think are likely to be winners from this, and what the format is likely to look like when these changes come into effect. So before we get into the Historic section, I want to start off by looking at the alchemy rebalances, because one in particular, Val Maroon Surveyor, is moving from 2 mana to 4 mana, which is an absolutely huge change, and in my opinion basically kills the deck, which I'm not too fussed about, honestly. Like, I think Val was a fine part of the format, but I didn't really like playing with it or against it, to be honest. There was kind of a feels bad where you could have interaction for it, but if they just happen to have redundancy with their Zenith and Chord of Calling, they could just play through it a lot of the time. There wasn't really any effective hate cards against them as well, apart from really narrow stuff like Night of Dusk's Shadow or other life gain denial effects. Right, if you have ETB hate, they can get around that with their lands or just other ways that they can potentially gain life. So I just generally think that Val going is fine, personally. And also, I think if you look at some of these other bans as well that I'm going to get onto in a second, if they hadn't taken action against Val and they had just done all of this stuff, I think Val would just immediately become the best deck. So I'm happy to see this, honestly. I'm sure there are some people out there who enjoyed playing with Val and are kind of annoyed now that the deck is basically going to be unplayable, but me personally, I didn't really enjoy playing with or against Val, if I'm being honest. I didn't feel like the gameplay was particularly good, so I'm personally happy to see this. So then, moving on to the Historic bans and unbans, the first one I want to talk about here, Eldrazi Temple is banned, and I'm so happy with this one. This is the one I've been asking for such a long time. Now, I've made multiple videos about this and the effect Eldrazi is having on the format. If you want more detail on it, I'll have a link to it down in the description. But basically, Eldrazi Temple, in my opinion, made the deck far too fast, far too consistent, and far too difficult to interact with. And in my opinion, the effect it was having on the format was basically, outside of Jund, forcing out interactive decks, which then made the format basically devolve into Eldrazi as the only real viable fair deck, fast aggro and fast combo, which just isn't good gameplay. 2 ships passing in the night, not much interaction at all. So the Eldrazi Temple ban, in my opinion, will basically put Eldrazi back to where it was pre-Eldrazi Temple printing, and it was still a good deck then, right? Andre Strasky managed to qualify in the Sorin format in the Mythic qualifier with Eldrazi without Temple, but I do think it's going to be quite a bit worse. It's going to be less consistent, it's going to be less fast, and it's going to be less popular as a result. So I think the Eldrazi Temple ban should really open up the format to mid-range, to control, to fair decks, to just interactive fair decks in general, which is also a really big deal because I think the knock-on effect of that is that the fast aggro and combo decks that we see very commonly now, auras, I mean, Val isn't really a big thing after this, but auras, energy, Lotus Field, you know what the format is right now, and then interactive decks coming into that will naturally make decks like Energy, decks like Lotus Field worse, because you now have control decks that are going to be sweeping the board and interacting with the Auras deck. You now have more mid-range decks that are going to be interacting with Auras. They're going to be using discard spells against the combo decks as well. So I feel like there's going to be way less 2 ships passing in the night and way more interaction, which is just, in my opinion, the best thing for the format. The next up, another one that I wasn't really expecting, but I'm very happy to see, Ajani is now banned, and this is huge because I always felt like, obviously, Boros Energy is, and potentially Mardu Energy as well, are the best variants of this, but we've seen a variety of decks running Ajani plus Bombardment, whether that's 4-color Samwise or, a variety of other builds that we've seen, and it always felt like, against those sorts of decks, the power level of a start with Ajani plus Bombardment on turn 3 is just so much stronger than any of their other starts. No matter what deck you're playing, it's so difficult to beat an early flip to Ajani. So I think, first of all, it's just going to reduce the variance of those incredibly, broken starts with Bombardment for a start. And then if the Ajani banning also results in Bombardment seeing less play, I also think that then opens up the format to small creature decks, because there's a variety of brews I've been trying over the past 6-7 months where it's either a small creature tribal deck or a small creature combo deck, and it just felt really hard to justify that when I just knew I could never beat an early Bombardment. And so I think there's a decent chance that Bombardment will see not no play. I think there's a chance that you still want to run 1 or 2 copies of Bombardment in like Boros, just to synergize with the Stadium Headliner and Voice of Victory and stuff like that. And also maybe there's a chance that the deck just evolves into Mardu with Marionette Apprentice and you still want to be running the Bombardment. But if I'm being honest, the main reason to run Bombardment was Ajani, and with Ajani gone, I think there's a chance that Bombardment sees less play, which, like I said, is really good for the small creature deck. So I think stuff like Merfolk, stuff like Humans, stuff like Goblins, and just small creature decks in general become a lot more viable again, which I also think is a really good thing for the format, and that just the viability of different decks and getting back to that Brewer's Paradise that made me fall in love with Historic is my favourite format. Anyway, then next up, Crop Rotation also banned. So this is mainly a hit to Lotus Field, but I have also been playing Crop Rotation recently in Eldrazi aggro decks. Now, obviously, with Eldrazi Temple getting banned, I think Eldrazi aggro as an archetype is probably not going to see much play anymore. But this Crop Rotation ban is mainly here to hit Lotus Field. And again, same sort of thing with these two. I think, Eldrazi Temple getting banned is going to be a net positive for the format, but Eldrazi is still going to be viable. Same sort of thing with Ajani. Boros Energy is still going to be viable. There's a huge variety of cards that you can run instead of Ajani in that shell. And then same sort of thing, Crop Rotation. Again, it will hurt the speed and consistency. Very importantly, the consistency of Lotus Field. But it doesn't make the deck unviable, right? It was still one of the best decks pre-Crop Rotation. It just means that your deck is going to be slightly slower. You're going to have less of those Lotus Field scam starts on turn 2, alongside Stifle or Consign. You're going to probably have to move back to either Expedition Map or Sylvan Scrying, which does make the deck a little bit slower, which I think is a good thing for the format going forwards, because I think if all of these changes had been made and Crop Rotation hadn't got hit, there's a good chance that Lotus Field just becomes the best deck in the format. And so yeah, Crop Rotation again hurts the speed and consistency of Lotus Field, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's still a tier 1 deck. It does sadden me a little bit because Crop Rotation was doing some other cool stuff in some brews I tried, but for the most part, it did feel like Crop Rotation was a power level outlier, right? The fact that the land enters untapped is so much better than all of the other effects that we've got, right? You compare this to a Sylvan Scrying or an Expedition Map, it's just so much more efficient on rate that I'm pretty happy to see this as well. Then next up, Scholar of the Lost Trove. So this, I imagine, I haven't read the description, but I imagine this is primarily because of the Persist deck in Best of 1, which honestly is pretty miserable to play against. I don't really enjoy Best of 1 because of the high variance anyway, but the Persist deck has been an issue for quite a long time, in my opinion. It does make Best of 1 into more of that 2 ships passing in the night, 2 linear decks gameplay that I don't really like. But with the recent printing of Aquatic Subtlety, this is also going to be a pretty big hit to that deck in Best of 3 as well. Now, having said that, the more I've thought about Aquatic Subtlety and played with it recently, I'm not really sure that the builds with Scholar and Hidetsugu would have been viable long term anyway. Like, they've been performing well in a variety of different shells recently, I've seen, especially in the Metagame Challenge. But my issue with it is that once people start accounting for it in their sideboard, there's 1,000,001 sideboard cards that just shut off the main part of the combo, and the fact you have to dedicate so many slots in the deck for it to work. You have to have Aquatic Subtlety, Scholar, Hidetsugu, then probably close to 8 expensive spells as well. So it's very difficult to build that deck without going all in on the combo, and once people adapt their sideboards for it, I think it's going to be tricky to run that long term anyway. So I'm not really sure it's going to have that much of a negative impact in Best of 3, and there are going to be more ways that you can build with Aquatic Subtlety that I'll get into a little bit later when I talk about Agent of Treachery. But yeah, Scholar is going to have an impact mainly in Best of 1, but honestly, I'm pretty happy to see this because I do tend to avoid Best of 1, right? I hate having to main deck Graveyard Hate just because of the Persist deck specifically, and the fact it can fairly consistently win on turn 2 does feel like a power level outlier in Historic to me as well. So yeah, pretty happy about this one, although it is kind of a shame that it does stop some of the new Aquatic Subtlety builds. Then next up we got Magus of the Moon and Harbinger of the Seas, and these two worry me, right? If these two hadn't been unbanned, this B&R is super close to a 10 out of 10 for me, but these two being unbanned in Historic, I'm really worried about this because we just don't have good counterplay, right? The only good fetch lands that we have in the format is Prismatic Vista, so if you happen to be running Prismatic Vista, you got 4 Vista, 4 basics to go alongside it. That's only 8 out of your 22, 24, 20 lands, however many you're running, that give you counterplay to Magus or Harbinger, which isn't that great, right? That's a best case scenario if you're already running Vista. And if you have a look at the mana base of even 2-color decks in Historic right now, they're usually 1 or 2 basics, and then the rest are either utility lands or dual lands in order to provide fixing. So these are an issue to me. We do have Dismember, which does give us some counterplay, but you know, I don't like forcing every deck to have to play Dismember because, you know, if Harbinger or Magus are popular, these are going to result in so many non-games. So I'm really worried about these two, honestly, right? If these two hadn't been unbanned, super gassed about the rest of the ban list. But yeah, these two do really worry me. Now, in terms of where they'd fit, Harbinger, I mean, the best home for it would be Merfolk, potentially, which hasn't really been a deck for a while. The reason for that mainly, though, has been Bombardment, right? I've been working on a few different Merfolk variants over the past year or so, and I think the biggest reason that I didn't really want to post videos on them or felt like they were good enough is because I just couldn't find a good way to consistently beat Bombardment. So if Ajani means Bombardment sees less play, maybe Merfolk does, but this is also a wizard, right? You could play it alongside Flame of Annoy, you could play it in a control shell to then lock the opponent out of the game, which is kind of scary, and then Magus, I mean, it's super flexible. You can run it in a variety of decks. So these two are a big concern to me. I'd be very interested to read their explanation about this to see, you know, maybe they'll say we've got some answers coming in future sets or something, but these two do worry me. We'll have to see how it plays out. But if these are popular, I'm worried about how many non-games they're going to create. And then next up, it looks like they're really reducing their tightness on free spells. Like, I was complaining recently about why they let Snuff Out and Mind Collapse be legal when they've said they don't want free spells in the format. It looks like they're softening their stance on it a little bit now, which I don't have a big issue with as long as they ensure that the free spells in the format aren't too oppressive. Force of Vigor, I'm not too bothered about, right? I think this is a fine card to have in the format, honestly. I've said in my ban this tier list video that I would be okay with having this unbanned as well. Force of Negation, I'm a little bit more surprised about this, though. On one hand, I do really like that this is kind of a stopgap way to prevent non-creature combo decks becoming too oppressive, right? Aquatic Subtlety is a new card that seems very powerful in Historic, and, you know, stuff like that, there's a chance it could be too oppressive, so having Force of Negation as a way for blue decks to be able to fight against those sorts of decks more consistently is really nice. But on the other hand, you've also got to think, you know, Psychic Frog tempo decks are also going to have this to defend their board against sweepers and stuff like that as well, which is pretty scary. So the jury's out on this one for me. I do feel like it could be a net positive for the format going forwards, but if Psychic Frog decks do become quite good, which, you know, I'll talk about my predictions a little bit later, but I do think that this could be too good in those sorts of decks. But we'll have to see. You know, jury's still out on this one, not 100% sure. Then Endurance, same sort of thing as Force of Vigor. I said in my ban this tier list video that I would actually be okay with them unbanning this if they're okay with allowing more free spells in the format. And this one's pretty nice, just another option for Graveyard Hate. I guess the big advantage of running this over something like Surgical, which we've had for a while, is that this can also be found off stuff like Chord of Calling. Also now gives you much more options for Yawgmoth, for example. You know, that's a deck that can do loops involving Endurance that we couldn't really do before. So, you know, pretty happy to see this one. Again, like I said, now they're softening their stance on free spells. I'm less bothered about Snuff Out. I'm less bothered about Mind Collapse. And these seem fine. Force of Negation is the one that I'm a little bit unsure about. But we'll see. We'll have to see how that one plays out. Then Wilderness Reclamation unban. Talked about this one in my unban video as well. I'm actually pretty happy to see this. I do think Reclamation has a chance of being playable, especially alongside Exploration, but yeah, very happy to see this one. Going to open up more possibilities. It just feels like a card that was pretty outdated on the ban list, so I'd be very surprised if this is problematic, but I do think that it has a chance of being playable. Not sure it'll be top tier, but I'm very excited to try out Reclamation again. And then finally, Agent of Treachery. Again, I've wanted to play this card in a variety of different shells over the years, you know, whether that's Persist, Creativity, Brews, but more recently I've actually been very interested in running this in Aquatic Subtlety as well, because I've been brewing a lot with Aquatic Subtlety, And whilst I do like the power level of the Hidetsugu Scholar builds, I do worry about their long-term viability once decks adjust their sideboard for them, because it gets hit by so many different sideboard cards, and the Hidetsugu Scholar package takes up so many slots in the deck that you can't really not go all in on the combo, meaning that, if decks do adapt and start running more hate, I think that's going to be a problem for those sorts of decks. So I've been looking more towards the Atraxa builds long term, but the issue for me with the Atraxa builds with Aquatic Subtlety is that Aquatic Subtlety itself isn't very good if Atraxa is your only hit, if you're playing more of that fair build as well, right? If you don't have Atraxa in hand, Aquatic Subtlety is literally just draw 2, discard 2. And so for the viability of the fair builds, I really felt like I wanted to have another blue creature that is good to reanimate, and then if you have 8 creatures that you can hit with Aquatic Subtlety and you can discard to bring back with Life Death or Necromancy, then the deck seems way more consistent and viable. And Agent of Treachery kind of feels like it could fill that slot great because, stealing an opponent's permanent early on is a very good thing to do with Evoke. If you're running Essence Flux to blink Atraxa, that seems very good with Agent of Treachery as well. So that's one potential home for it straight away. And there's a variety of decks that it can slot into as well. So again, this was another card that I was kind of crying out for them to get unbanned. So those are all the changes, and honestly, if it wasn't for the Magus and the Harbinger unbanned, this would be so close to a 10 out of 10 for me. The biggest thing for me is, I've been brewing in Historic for years at this point, and over the past year specifically, it's felt so difficult to brew new viable decks, mainly because they were either too fair or too interactive, meaning they couldn't consistently beat Eldrazi, or they were built around small creatures, meaning they couldn't beat Bombardment. So these 2 bans alone, I think, should really open up the format, and I'm so excited to return to those loads and loads of brews that I've been trying over the past year, because I do think there's a good chance that they could be viable now in this post-ban Historic, hopefully. In terms of the decks that I predict to be good going forwards, I think Jund is going to be the number 1 deck that I'm going to be trying, because I think that is a deck that just hasn't been hit on this at all, and is going to really benefit from not only the Eldrazi Temple ban, but also the crop rotation and the Ajani ban as well, mainly the Eldrazi Temple ban, though. I think Jund is in a really interesting position right now where it really struggles to beat Eldrazi consistently, but it tends to be really good against those fast linear decks that were being run to beat Jund, like your Auras, like your Energy, like your Lotus Field as well. So I think Jund is going to be a really effective deck going forwards. I think Psychic Frog tempo decks also get real benefit from this as well. They really struggled to consistently beat Eldrazi Temple, or just Eldrazi as a deck as well. Also, they struggled against Energy and specifically Bombardment as well, because obviously in Dimir, Blue-Black don't really have good answers for enchantments outside of, Feed the Swarm into the Floodmaw that aren't particularly efficient at what they're doing. So I think Dimir decks, especially with Force of Negation, are going to be a lot better than they were as well. So that's another kind of archetype as a whole that I'm very interested in returning to. I think Fair Aquatic Subtlety is going to really benefit from Agent of Treachery, providing redundancy for both Aquatic Subtlety and reanimation cards as well. Not to mention, I think if you are using Atraxa with Subtlety, Force of Negation is a really big pickup for that sort of deck as well. So I'm very excited to try that out. I still think Lotus Field is going to be good. It's just going to return to that slightly slower setup with Expedition Map and Sylvan Scrying, but again, I think that's still going to be a very strong deck. Definitely something that you need to be accounting for in your sideboard. But yeah, I'm so excited to try this out once it goes live. So like I said, I haven't actually read any of their explanations to do with their justifications for this. So next up, I'm basically just going to be reading through what they say about it, whether I agree with it, whether I disagree with it, whether I feel like they've got a good understanding of the current metagame, because obviously we've seen in previous B&Rs, they say stuff that makes it clear they don't really have their finger on the pulse in terms of what's going on with Historic. But having said that, the bans they've chosen here, apart from Magus and Harbinger, does make me optimistic that I might end up agreeing with a lot of what they say. So let's just start reading through this. So at the time of Historic's inception, we established several guidelines for determining what makes a card ban-worthy in the format. Philosophically, Historic was meant to be a place where players could queue up with any card in their collection and feel like they had a chance to compete in a fun, interactive game of Magic. We did want them running into mass land denial like Blood Moon, a card that notoriously sees play due to locking out players from casting spells. Free spells too detracted from their gameplay experience. The timing stops that free spells constantly inject into the game, along with their rate and strength in Eternal formats, made them undesirable as staples for ladder gameplay, especially when the most popular decks, Elves, What? Slivers is not something I expected to see in here. We're on the casual side. This introduced a ceiling on the power and complexity of historic games. When you queued up on the historic ladder, you knew your opponent wasn't going to solitude your creature while they were tapped out. The average ladder deck had a chance to compete with the format mainstays, which included decks like Mono Green Devotion at about the Pioneer power level. I mean, there's a few things here that I'm not 100% sure about. I don't think Mono Green Devotion was ever really the same power level as Pioneer. I always felt like Historic has been a big step above that. Utopia Sprawl is such a big addition. Fanatic of Ronus is such a big addition. But, I'm kind of nitpicking here. Over time, Historic has come to bear the addition of many powerful transgressive cards, shifting the metagame dramatically from its early days. The addition of Modern Horizons 3 was a key turning point, as several competitive strategies that functioned at modern power level were introduced. The popular ladder strategies remained popular, but they could no longer compete with the top decks in the metagame by win share, and as the decks became stronger, they also became less interactive. I don't agree with this. I think the reason the decks became less interactive was purely because of Eldrazi, right? If you look pre-Eldrazi, the format, the Sorin format, as much as I didn't like that, was a mid-range format, was an interactive format. So I don't agree with this, really. Like, maybe, again, they're looking at Best of One, because I can already see here they're talking about Persist. I think Best of One as a format is just less interactive by the very nature of it, right? There's a real risk to running interaction in Best of One, because if the type of interaction you're running isn't good against the deck your opponent's running, like if you run a bunch of creature removal and your opponent's on a non-creature combo deck, they're just completely dead cards. So Best of One, as a result, benefits from, or incentivizes you to run linear decks. So if they're talking about Best of One, I agree. If they're talking about Best of Three, I disagree, because, like I said, I think the reason why Best of Three has become so uninteractive is specifically because of Eldrazi. But anyway, let's move on. The most popular deck used to reach Mythic in Best of One plays Persist to reanimate Scholar as early as turn 2, setting off a chain of spells. The other top decks, even in Best of 3 Historic, forego interaction in favour of linear consistency. Boros Energy, Eldrazi, Val, Lotus Field, and to a lesser extent Auras are all decks that can end the game in short order without clear counterplay, apart from enact my strategy faster. So yeah, I agree that this is an issue, but I think that this is all entirely because of Eldrazi, right? If you look pre-Eldrazi, there were interactive decks, there were mid-range. Control, conventional control hasn't really been a big deal in Historic. Obviously, we had the Strict Proctor, Flage, Null Drifter kind of scam control decks. And obviously, we have seen, Dimir, Psychic Frog, tempo decks with counter spells as well. So yeah, I think this is mainly down to Eldrazi. But again, nitpicking here a little bit. So talking about Val here, these bans aim to address the format's clearest power and play pattern outliers. Val combo is addressed with a rebalance, moving it to 4 mana. Again, I'm pretty happy with this. Then we've got Simic Eldrazi. Just having a quick look at the list. Might be Kapala's maybe, but anyway. Eldrazi is the most dominant strategy in the high ranks of Historic and comes in a variety of flavours, all powered by the ramp of Ugin's Labyrinth and Eldrazi Temple. This redundancy is key to the consistency and power of the strategy. We are choosing to ban Eldrazi Temple as Ugin's Labyrinth has other applications in the format outside of the Eldrazi shell, which is true, and this is something that I've been asking for a really long time. I think Ugin's Labyrinth wasn't the issue. I think Eldrazi as a whole prior to Eldrazi Temple was a fine power level. It was the consistency of having them both. And if they are going to ban one, I prefer them taking out Eldrazi Temple, because then that makes the aggro builds of Eldrazi much less viable, which I think is a positive, because in my opinion right now, prior to the bans, aggro Eldrazi is the best build because it gives you a fighting chance against the other linear decks. Whereas Ugin's Labyrinth can still see play in some other decks as well. And then we believe in an Eldrazi deck without Eldrazi Temple can still be a reasonable strategy in Historic, which I agree with, without pushing out slow strategies, as it was in between the release of Modern Horizons 3 and Edge of Eternity. So yeah, agree with pretty much that. Boros Energy has been making waves in Historic since the release of MH3. Despite adjustments to Galvanic Discharge, Guide of Souls, not surprised, the sheer card quality of the deck continues to propel it to a win rate well over 60% at all segments of the ladder. The individual card we believe to be the largest rate outlier is Ajani. I completely agree with that as well. It's specifically with Bombardment, that's the biggest issue with that deck in my opinion. As a 2-drop that is nearly impossible to trade profitably against, Ajani is responsible for many wins on the back of his transformation and many more simply by attacking and blocking. Though this ban will impact other white-best strategies outside of energy, we believe it is necessary to lower the ceiling of the format. Again, I really like this because, like I said, I think energy as a whole, the average draw is fine, but Ajani plus Bombardment, or Ajani just killing it with a removal spell even to flip it, it always feels like so much more powerful than any of their other openings. Then Lotus Field. We initially did not pre-ban crop rotation from Historic as an experiment to see if it could function in a reasonable power band in a format without Magic's most powerful lands like Gaia's Cradle. After a stint where it fueled a resurgent Lotus Field combo, we became confident that a forward-facing ban was necessary, especially as more lands like Dark Depths are added to Arena, which, yeah, I agree with that as well. I do think, crop rotation is one of those other cards that is just going to keep getting more powerful. And like I said, I do think the power level of crop rotation compared to the alternatives that we have access to right now is, the difference is absolutely huge. Compare it to a Sylvan Scrying or an Expedition map, it's, massive. Lastly, we are unhappy with the extreme polarity of the Scholar combo deck and are banning Scholar to reduce the number of best of one games that end abruptly. It's possible that a different creature will come along that fits into the same reanimation cell, which, is kind of interesting because obviously you run Conspiracy Unraveler. There maybe is something else that you can just slot in instead. And in that case, we will re-examine the tools in Historic that allow for efficient reanimation. At the same time, we hope that our unbans will give players some options to turn to against powerful graveyard strategies, even in Best of One in Historic. So again, I haven't really played too much Best of One recently, but one of the main reasons is that I feel like it's really difficult to consistently beat Scholar. You're right, you either have to have Graveyard Hate or be able to kill on turn 2 or 3 yourself. So hopefully this will make Best of One a little bit less high variance, basically. Then on unbans, this is the bit I'm most interested about. So these unbans break some of our long-standing heuristics in favour of adding clear counterplay against dominant strategies now and in the future. Though there are some free spells remaining on the ban list that could be unbanned from a power level standpoint, we didn't see a positive role for these cards in the metagame and are keeping them banned for complexity's sake. So again, I kind of like this. They're already making a lot of changes. They don't want to go overboard and make too much legal at once. I'd like, unban these few, see how they do, and then hopefully they'll address it at a regular interval. Overall, Historic's threats far outpace its answers. Absolutely true. This is something I've also been complaining about for a while. Contributing to its status as a linear non-interactive format at the high levels of competition, again, I do feel like this is partially a Best of One thing, partially an Eldrazi thing, so I'm hoping that will change as well. A recurring theme of these changes is the ability for players to have obvious options for counterplay against these powerful strategies, and as part of that, the ability to address these threats efficiently is critical. Force of Negation offers the ability to stop a combo or game-ending spell without snowballing your own game plan, making it an excellent reactive card that can hopefully prop up slower decks. Yep, I like the effect that this has on the format, but again, my concern with it is defending your board state in a tempo deck. You can't use it to protect a combo during your turn, but if your game plan is just get Psychic Frogs and Tamios and efficient snowbally threats down, using Force of Negation to counter the opponent's sorcery speed sweepers or their proactive game plan to defend your board does worry me a little bit. But again, jury's out on that one because this can have a positive impact on the format as well. We'll just have to see how good it is in Psychic Frog decks. Then Endurance does the same against graveyard combos while being a main deckable card in Best of One. That's interesting. I didn't actually consider that because there is definitely a massive drawback to running cards like Surgical in Best of One, which a lot of decks are having to resort to doing. So I hadn't thought about that, but that's another big positive for Endurance in Best of One specifically. With bans taking the current top strategies down a notch, one linear deck with the potential to become problematic in the future is Affinity, which is also kind of interesting. Affinity I've barely seen it on the ladder recently, but it is something to consider. So I guess that's another reason why they wanted Force of Vigor to be unbanned. So yeah, Affinity is actually another one that could benefit from it, but I always feel like Affinity is a deck where it's good when it's unknown, but as soon as people start accounting for it, there's so many narrow sideboard cards like Force of Vigor, Meltdown, Shatterstorm that just completely destroy the deck that, it feels like a deck that is always going to be tricky to run when it's a known entity. But yeah, that's definitely another deck that I'm going to be returning to, and I definitely could see being very powerful in future. So Force of Vigor offers clear sideboard counterplay against that, and similar strategies that rely on artifacts and enchantments, which would otherwise be difficult to trade favourably against. One of the key pain points of Eldrazi's dominance was the lack of options to turn against its powerful non-basic lands. Okay, this is the bit I want to read. Modern, for example, has historically relied on catch-all land hate effects like Blood Moon that are unavailable in Historic to combat powerful land-based strategies. We believe that Magus of the Moon and Harbinger of the Seas offer the right amount of interactivity against current and future land decks while inflicting minimum damage to the more casual Historic scene. Okay, this worries me a lot because there is no counterplay to this. And also I feel like the reason or the justification for unbanning Magus and Harbinger is that, if you didn't ban Eldrazi Temple, then maybe unban Magus and Harbinger. I don't agree with that, and I've said that in my previous ban video because it has real implications for the rest of the format. But this, if you're playing a 2-color deck, you get hosed by this, right? I really don't agree with their logic here. This is a worry to me. These creatures are generally easier to remove than an enchantment like Blood Moon, while being clear and effective options against non-basic land-centric strategies. I don't get this because surely Eldrazi Temple getting banned means that these aren't necessary anymore. And surely after seeing what Eldrazi Temple did, the solution is to pre-ban soul lands, lands that tap for multiple mana going forwards so that we don't need these. I don't know, man. We see the additional effects of making basics matter more as another plus in an Eternal format. Yeah, but not without fetch lands. Give us fetch lands and Magus and Harbinger and Blood Moon. I'm fine with that. But with just Vista, you can't just make every deck a monocolor deck, right? Like I said, even if you're a 2-color deck, you run 4 Vista, 4 basics. In order to fix your mana efficiently enough, you need to be running a lot of other dual lands, and if you happen to open with those dual lands, you just lose to Magus and Harbinger. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not convinced by this. I was really hoping there'd be some other justification or something I hadn't thought about, but this is a worry to me. We still do have Dismember, which they don't mention here, but again, I am worried about this because this makes me think that they either don't know that there's not fetch lands in Historic, or they don't know how oppressive these cards can be when you don't have access to fetch lands. But we'll see. Maybe these don't see play that much. Actually, no, what am I talking about? I was going to say maybe these don't see play now because of Eldrazi Temple getting banned, but in terms of my predictions, like I was mentioning earlier, I do think Magus and Harbinger could be worth building around because they are so good against Historic mana bases in general. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. And then in addition, we are unbanning 2 cards that are relics of past versions of Historic and we believe would be fine or offer positive content in current Historic. Wilderness Reclamation was troublesome when the top of the format was close to Pioneer's power level, but now it has to live alongside more powerful strategies. Agent of Treachery was banned in large part due to its use alongside Winota. Was it? Maybe I'm misremembering it, but I swear Agent of Treachery got banned because of Transmogrify? Maybe that's the standard build and I'm getting confused here. Let me know in the comments, but either way, it doesn't really matter. Who is no longer a problem due to the format's evolutionary balance. Agree with this. And then going forward, we intend to prioritize power level and play patterns on a card-by-card basis over our past heuristics when evaluating Historic legality. For new additions to MTG Arena, cards like Force of Negation and Endurance that can contribute to a healthier metagame will no longer be pre-banned as they were in the past. For all these changes, we will keep a close eye on how the format develops and continue to adjust things as necessary. So, interesting. I do agree with most of what they're saying, apart from this. This part here worries me quite a lot. The rest I'm pretty happy with. The thing that kind of confuses me, though, is whether they're going to be doing rebalances for Historic anymore. Because the impression I got from what they said in the past was that rather than outright banning stuff, they would be nerfing stuff. So I was thinking maybe they'll nerf Eldrazi Temple to enter tapped. Maybe they'll nerf Ajani to only flip in combat or something, so be interesting to see if they still plan on doing Historic nerfs or if the nerfs going forwards will just be for alchemy. And if the nerfs are just for alchemy, maybe they could then not have those nerfs affect Historic, although then you've got 3 different versions of the same card potentially, so I'm not 100% sure about that. But I mean, overall, I'm happy with this, but I am worried it's just gonna be, you know, a much healthier format, and then Magus and Harbinger just causing a ton of non-games. But either way, I'm so excited to try the format with these bands in. Definitely let me know in the comments what you think. Definitely let me know in the comments what you're planning to play, what decks you think will benefit from this. What brews you've got around some of the new unbans. Be really interested to see what you guys are thinking of doing. Either way, I'm going to be playing an absolute ton. Honestly, I was starting to get burnt out on Historic because I really didn't like the non-interactive gameplay. But now it looks like, outside of these two cards, hopefully we'll be a lot healthier going forward. So yeah, very, very happy. Also kind of interesting that they're limiting Necropotence rather than Dark Ritual, which is kind of interesting. But again, I haven't really played much Timeless at all recently. But yeah, Historic, very, very happy with these changes. I really hope Magus and Harbinger aren't problems, and if they are, I really hope they address them quickly. It is a bit of a worry to me that Historic is now seemingly going to be on the regular B&Rs with the other formats, right? I got excited when they originally said that they would be nerfing stuff for Historic, which would enable them to make changes more quickly. Now, if we're having to wait at the same sort of pace as Standard and stuff, if it turns out that Magus and Harbinger are really bad, which I can imagine they will be, like I'm worried about these two cards, then yeah, we'll have to see. But outside of that, I'm so excited to try these out. So yeah, like I said, let me know in the comments what you think. Either way, can't wait for this to get in effect, and I'll be trying out a bunch of new stuff, and I'll catch you in the next one. Big up.